This time it's different. What's different? Well, what's different this time is that China is using this big demand for physical metal is in the arena of the COMEX, meaning it's commercial 1,000 ounce bars. So even though the retail market can have an effect, it's a flea on a dog relative to the tail of the dog. So once the industrial needs were not met, you saw that the physical market took over the silver price. And that has happened, as I said, very sporadically in the past. This time, it was the real deal. And we saw something that we haven't seen in a long time. We saw the silver price in 2025 go up 140%. We haven't seen those kind of years in a long time. Yeah. Secondly, we saw what happened in January is the price went up 70% in 1 month. Now, I am not here to be an apologist for the bankers. Anyone that's listened to me for more than 5 minutes knows my thoughts about that. However, it is a derivatives market, even in China. The market did get ahead of itself, and it was overextended, and the paper price or the paper paradigm took over. So temporarily, even though the physical 1,000-ounce bar market had basically taken control for weeks, perhaps months, and everybody's kind of cheering that understood what was really happening, it didn't negate what was going on in the futures exchanges around the world. And again, they got ahead of themselves. There's lots of talk about what happened, about a huge Chinese short. I think part of that's true. I haven't been able to verify it, but a good friend that's a hedge fund manager verified it to me. So that brought things back into reality. So that is now where we are. So now we're in a struggle between who's going to win from this point. And it could go back and forth a couple more times. Is it the paper pushes or is it the physical demand?
David Morgan says silver's big 2025 rally happened because real physical demand is beating the paper market. COMEX leverage is about 6 to 1, not 100 to 1. Banks can move prices short-term, but not stop the trend. He sees $100 possible if demand stays strong and treats silver as insurance, not speculation. Thanks for watching. Give a thumbs up and subscribe to Fine Metals for the latest insights.
Well, people are going to hate me. And, again, I'm not a lover of the bullion banks and the banking system at large. Let's keep that on the record. But banks do not like risk. So a lot of this idea that the banks are massively naked short just is not true. The bullion banks basically control the market. How do they control it? Through physical metal that they leverage in the futures exchange. And is every one of it covered and not naked? No, they are naked short. However, not to the level that people believe or are taught or told over and over again. Most of that metal has, some backing to it. Again, it's not a one-to-one. Having said that, it's the commodities trading funds. It's what we call the opposite of the commercial, the banks, and it's the public that are basically doing the naked. It's not all of them, of course. So the balance between the longs and the shorts have to meet. There's a winner for a loser. There's a zero-sum game. The banks almost always win, but they're not as leveraged nakedly as it is touted to be. And this is something that I guess people just don't understand or want to believe that. They want to make the banks the bad guys. I kind of do, but I also want to be as objectively true as possible. And they are not nearly as leveraged as it's been out to be. In fact, if you go into the COMEX, you look at the open interest and you look at the amount of silver that's on there, instead of 100 to 1 coverage, last time I looked, it was 6 to 1, not 100 to 1. That was futures only. If we throw in options, and I didn't do the math because I didn't really want to bother, but it might be 10 to 1. So this idea that now that doesn't account, to be fair, what's over in the LBMA, which is outside of the system, which there's forwards are called, this is like futures, and that's a paper contract. So there's probably more than what I'm indicating. But this idea that there's 100 to 1, that kind of leverage is gone. And it's been gone for some time. I think the people that know the most, which is pretty much the bullion banks, know what the actual supply demands are and how stressed the markets are. And knowing that, are you going to go overboard in the leveraged arena? No, you're not. You're going to cut back and make sure that you're not going to be in trouble. I thought about this my first cup of coffee this morning. What I've advocated for in the past, and I still think might be the best, I'm not sure, is a cash-only market. Just to digress slightly, the egg market and the milk market used to be in the futures markets. It doesn't exist, hasn't for decades. But they are both cash markets. We still go to the grocery store and buy milk and eggs. You could have a cash-only market in silver. Now, think about the margin thing. If my margin goes up from 10% to 20% to 30 to 40, what if I go to 100% margin? I'm now in a cash market. So if you really think about it objectively, the harder the margins go up, the closer we're getting to a cash market, which gets rid of my favorite expression, who's who in the zoo. Who are the guys that are on very thin margin that are weak sisters that are going to get flushed out anyway, that don't know what they're doing, never traded before, or just aren't, thinking through this market. So the higher margin goes, really, the more we're forcing a cash-only market. So I wanted to get that into the record because it's an alternative way of thinking about it, the way the mainstream silver bulls think about how the futures market works. So I'm looking for the gold-silver ratio. That's really the only way not the only, but one of the best ways to determine silver being overvalued or undervalued. If we get to a 30-to-1 gold-silver ratio, which is roughly double where we are now, meaning silver is outperforming gold 2-to-1 from this point forward, I'd start looking at taking some profits off the table. Could it get beyond that? Yes. Could it get to the classic or monetary ratio of 15, 16-to-1? It could. Could it go below that? Yes. But I don't think it's going to go much below 30-to-1. But time will tell. But that's when I know that the physical market or the silver market is at a level that we should really consider enough's enough and taking at least partial profits. I've been, to get it on the record again, I've said from the get-go that you cannot manipulate the market for the long-term trend. I think that's pretty apparent. Within that trend, you can manage the price. When is the price managed? Most often in what we used to call the aftermarket or the overseas market, which now has a lot of power. It's switched, as we just discussed. But earlier on, very light trading, the banks would come in and throw massive amounts of paper, massive amounts of contracts, and they push the price down. And that would start the algorithms saying, oh, margin call. It'd open up in New York, and it would have a big follow through where you get a lot of downward pressure on the market. And that's happened again and again and again. Now it's a little bit of a different story because the physical demand is really dictating the market, even though we had this big move in January. And honestly, I told, publicly and privately on my premium service, look, I'm getting worried. This is almost double parabolic. And I don't care if it's soybean oil, cattle futures, or silver. When it goes up that fast, that high, something's got to give. Be prepared for a correction. And of course, we've got one, and everyone yells, well, it's manipulation. Actually, it's normal market activities in the futures market. I defy anyone to prove me wrong on that. I'd say pretty much. I want to digress into the palladium market because Ford Motor Company came into the palladium market early on. In fact, I was long palladium at the time. And Ford didn't know how tight the palladium market was. So they decided to switch from platinum, which is much more expensive, to palladium for catalytic converters and made a huge order. So what happened is the market took off. And all of a sudden, the margins went up. If you were long or short, I was long thinking I could add to my position. No, my banker said, oh, no, you got to put up more margin, both sides, longs and shorts. So the market kept going up and up. You will not believe this, but you can verify it. At the top of the market, you had to put up double the cash price to keep your futures position, which is ridiculous. In other words, everyone was flushed out of their futures position, and it became a cash-only market. But it did not stop the price from going up, up, and up until it finally got up to the ultimate high. So I use that as an analogy for the same thing that could happen in the silver market. Does it mitigate it? It can. But when you've got a demand that cannot be exceeded to anything but physical, and there's only so much metal to go around, the price is going to get to where it's going to get, regardless of what the margins are. Well, the acceleration, which we talked about a couple times, and also, if there's congestion in the physical side, will keep the market moving higher, which we are seeing. So that's why I remain bullish, and I still think the top isn't in. But there could be a time where, the industry's satisfied. They've got 2 years supply in the warehouse. Oh, graphene can work in solar panels now, and it is economic. So, those possibilities do exist. No market grows to the moon, even the silver market. So you want to be a little bit careful. You want to be a little circumspect that this is a market to hedge the fiat currency fiasco and everything else that I've taught for the last 40 years. But it doesn't mean that the market won't change at some point. So you have to be aware of that. Investment in silver is kind of a staple in India, and it was that way, and it still is. But as India got more and more wealthy, they moved to gold. I mean, it seems that the population prefers gold over silver, but they still like silver. Now that it's become more and more wealthy, you're seeing ETFs deployed in India, as you just said, which means the more and more ability to invest in silver without having to buy a silver bracelet, down the road type of thing, and really be able to participate in, let's say, substantive amounts outside the physical realm. Of course, the ETFs are backed by physical. Point being, I think that we have a double whammy, meaning the industry's got a place where they are not satisfied with the amount of silver they hold in reserve, and investors have more ability to buy silver in size worldwide than ever before. But I'm going to be looking for what I talked to Mike Lorenzo on the Silver Institute yesterday. I'm going to see if there's a big increase or a notable increase in recycling. I'm going to look at sentiment. I think a lot of it's been punched out in this January pullback. I'm going to look for how quickly we go up to 100 again. So if it's a matter of stabilizing around a trading range of, say, 85 to 75 for a matter of 3 weeks, and then, a month and a half from now, we're back up near the high 90s, that just proves how much physical demand there is and how strong this market is. And that's kind of what I expect. I don't expect another 6 months for a trading range. I think there will be one, but I don't think it's going to be very long. So we really are in the final phase from everything I've learned over the last 40 years of studying markets. That's markets, not just the metals markets. And this means that if you're not on board now, don't be afraid, but don't overdo it. You don't need a lot of, gold exposure to have a hedge. Again, it's something that we really don't want to need, want to have to use in a way. I mean, if you want to look at it from an investment and an insurance policy methodology, that's fine. You can do both. But if you just look at purely at, an insurance position against whatever else you own, real estate, stocks, bonds, what have you, then I think a modest position is fine. And no one cries about paying their fire insurance on their house every year because their house didn't burn down. It's a price you pay for stability and insurance that, if something really goes wrong, you're covered. And I think that's the way to approach the market at this point in time for most people. If you look at the extremes, when I wrote the January issue last year, gold had already made a substantial move, but silver and platinum hadn't moved. I said, if you're a new member, please buy silver or platinum or both. If you're a long-term subscriber, consider swapping some gold for platinum. And once ink dried on that issue, platinum and silver both took off and both outperformed gold year over year, which was surprising because gold had already made a huge move. And I just felt the best value was in those two metals. And just to comment on it a little bit further, using the ratios and how they work for you. If you do a silver platinum ratio, which hardly anyone looks at, I'm one of the goofballs it does, you will see that silver platinum ratio, platinum is at a 25-year low relative to what it costs in terms of silver. So if you wanted to swap your silver for platinum, you're buying it at a 25-year low, moving your silver into platinum. That's something to think about. The COMEX has a lot more paper flying around, let's say. But when you get into first notice day and you get into deliveries, it drops off substantially. And you see these huge numbers and people report, all that has to happen is people stand for delivery and it's going to take down the COMEX. Well, the numbers add up. I won't argue the math. The problem is they don't understand how the market actually works because most of those are commercials and they hold their positions, they roll them over in the next delivery month. And the game goes on and on and on. So it doesn't have nearly as much meaning as some purportedly say it does. I mean, there's people out there that are pretty well recognized in the industry that will tell you, when the next delivery month, the whole thing falls apart because there's a real failure to deliver. Now, could that happen? And the answer is yes, it could. But at this point in time, I don't see it happening. I think the real stress is what we keep talking about, and that is the Shanghai exchange, how much true demand there is, and when or if it will subside. And there's less leverage there. So because of that and what you just read, where they're going to make sure there's less leverage than what we just saw, where it was kind of outside the boundaries of what I thought their limits already were. Anyway, it took place. it's done now. They're tightening up the rule book, let's say, and I think we're going to get a much more orderly market. I mean, you really don't want any commodity to be overly stressed as far as leverage. And silver is the king of kings. It's got more leverage in it than any other futures market that exists by far. And that's why you see these huge moves that you don't see in some of the other commodities.